"Get out of the car now before I make sure you never sit behind the wheel again," he shouted into the cold night, the gun pointed straight at the face of a black woman sitting still inside the car. But he didn't know that the very next sentence would make his hand shake and his mouth go silent. "I am the Attorney General of this state, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The whole online world fell silent for 8 minutes. The clip went viral. The badge was revoked. Which state are you in? If it were you, would you survive? Delia Monroe gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, though a part of her longed to pull over and rest miles back. The road ahead was endless, a narrow stretch carved through the deep southern Broughton forest, cloaked in an eerie silence broken only by the faint whisper of pine needles brushing in the cold night breeze. Tall, ancient pine trees stood like sentinels on either side, their dense branches creating a shadowed corridor with no streetlights to pierce the darkness. There were no other cars in sight, nothing but the soft glow of her headlights illuminating the rough asphalt ahead, the mellow hum of tires rolling smoothly over the cold surface, and a low, unobtrusive tune playing on the radio. Music deliberately chosen to calm nerves, but unable to quiet the storm of thoughts in her mind. She was driving home from a closed-door meeting with state legislators, a gathering that had lasted for hours, where they had debated and forged a strong consensus on a new draft bill aimed at curbing police abuse of power. The room had been tense, but hopeful, the kind of rare agreement that felt like progress. But now, as Delia sat behind the wheel in the stillness of the forest, she knew that real battles weren't fought in conference halls or on paper. They were fought on nights like this, on lonely roads, with the real and raw face of authority. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the rearview mirror. A police car had appeared behind her, close enough that its presence was undeniable, but still silent. No siren, no flashing lights, just a steady beam of headlights. Delia glanced over her shoulder, her brow furrowing slightly with cautious alertness. The car was following her persistently, refusing to fall back or pass by. She slowed down, easing her car to the side as if to yield, signaling she was willing to comply. Still, the police car closed the gap. The air grew taut, thick with tension, silence heavy between them. Just halfway. Then, without warning, the night exploded with sound and color. Sirens blared, piercing the quiet with sharp urgency. Red and blue lights spun wildly, slicing through the darkness like blades cutting through black velvet. Delia's hands tightened on the wheel as she carefully pulled over to the roadside, her breath even but her heart racing beneath the calm exterior. She rolled down her window deliberately, her movements steady and controlled. She rolled down her window deliberately, her movements steady and controlled. She knew the drill. No sudden moves, no resistance, no giving the officers any excuse. Yet, despite her preparation, the humiliation that came with being stopped by the police was a weight she couldn't shake. Heavy footsteps echoed from the forest floor, crunching on gravel as a tall figure approached her window. A flashlight was suddenly shone into her face, its beam harsh and unforgiving, like a spotlight under interrogation. A man's voice, deep and mocking, broke the silence. "Driving late, huh? Papers, chocolate-skinned lady?" Delia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, meeting his gaze evenly through the window. "May I ask the reason for stopping me?" Her voice was calm but firm, deliberate. The officer stepped back just enough to lower the flashlight to her chin, his smirk widening as if he had just heard the dumbest thing in the world. "I don't need a reason to check a suspect," he snarled, each word grinding through clenched teeth. The sharpness in his tone sent a cold rush down her spine. Then a loud knock hit the right side window. Delia turned sharply as another officer appeared, baton in hand, no greeting, no introduction, no courtesy extended. He knocked harder, then shouted, "Open the door, now!" Delia remained silent, her expression unreadable, tilting her head with a cool detachment. She reached slowly for her wallet, pulling it out with deliberate care, and passed her license and registration through the narrow opening in the window. Officer Colburn snatched the documents, his eyes never leaving her face, scanning every detail as if trying to uncover some hidden fault. "Is this your car?" he demanded. "Yes," Delia replied clearly. "Where are you coming from?" he pressed, his tone sharp. "I am not obligated to answer without a reason for the stop," Delia said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Refusing to cooperate, the officer's voice rose as he took a step back, flexing his hands as if ready to escalate. "I see suspicious signs. Unclear plate, no GPS on, a woman driving alone in the forest. Is that normal?" His words hung in the air like an accusation. Delia leaned slightly away from the flashlight's harsh beam, but her eyes remained locked on his. "I'm doing nothing wrong. I know my rights." The second officer, Carter Kless, circled the car slowly, his voice cold and measured as he cut through the night. "You know your rights too well, getting tricky. Where have you been? Who did you see? What did you do? I'm asking 3 times. Delia stared straight ahead, refusing to engage, her silence a shield. She raised her phone but didn't dial or speak, just held it up, screen glowing faintly in the night. Colburn's flashlight swept over her hand threateningly. "No calls allowed without cooperation. Turn it off now." She didn't move. A heavy silence fell, heavier than any command. Colburn slammed his hand on the hood, the sharp sound echoing like a warning. Then he leaned close, his voice low and venomous. "I've seen many like you, full of legal talk but clueless. You think a diploma fools the cops?" Kless tested the passenger door lock, then stepped back so Delia could hear clearly. "She'll call for backup. Let's see who shows." Delia turned her head slowly to the left, letting the flashlight fully illuminate her face before she spoke, calm and precise. "If you don't have a search warrant, please step back from my car." Colburn sneered, a cruel twist to his mouth. "Warrant? Here, I'm the warrant, and now I say we search. Got something to hide?" "You're overstepping your authority," Delia replied without hesitation. That statement shattered the fragile balance. Colburn paused. Then his voice rose sharply. "Overstepping? You drive like a criminal, refuse to cooperate like one, talk like you've memorized lawyer scripts." Kless pulled out handcuffs, the metallic click cutting through the silence like a judge's gavel. Delia gripped her phone lightly, eyes locked on both men without a flicker of fear. "I demand your names, badge numbers, and reasons for stopping me." Colburn stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I'll tell you, you're untrustworthy, driving like you're hauling illegal stuff, and your attitude makes people want to snap your neck." Delia didn't answer with anger. Instead, she spoke clearly, ensuring the microphone on her phone recorded every word. "My name is Delia Monroe." Colburn's glare hardened, his jaw tightening. "So? You think that name means anything here?" Delia's voice softened, yet a cold edge crept in. "Keep going. Everything you say tonight will be reported to the Supreme Court office." Cold wind swept through the towering pines, rustling dry branches with a brittle whisper. The flashlight still shone fiercely in her face. She did not look away, did not raise her voice, refusing to give them any excuse. No woman should have to yell to be heard in a civilized country. She was not unafraid, but she understood that yielding or staying silent now would only let the cycle continue, letting those without cameras, status, or chance to survive suffer in silence. Colburn's hand tightened on his gun holster, a final warning in the night. Tonight, he had chosen the wrong person to confront. The flashlight beam cut sharply through the cold, foggy night air, its harsh, unforgiving light tearing through the darkness like a knife. The temperature hovered just above freezing, only 4 degrees, and Delia Monroe's breath began to form steady, uneasy clouds against the inside of her windshield. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, placing both hands firmly back on it, desperate to maintain control, not only of her car, but also of the tense situation unfolding with a frail, fraying thread of hope. The night pressed in on her like a suffocating weight, thick with danger and injustice. "You're overstepping your authority," Delia said calmly, each word clear, measured, and deliberate. Her voice held no challenge, no anger, just a cold, unshakable statement of fact. These weren't empty words or rhetoric. They were grounded in law, in rights codified and enshrined to protect citizens from precisely this kind of abuse. But to Ray Colburn, the officer looming outside her window with his flashlight stabbing into her face, her calmness was fuel for his mounting anger. A sharp knock rattled against the passenger window. It was harder this time, more decisive. Carter Kless appeared from the shadows, gripping his baton with tight white-knuckled hands, his eyes locked onto Delia's face with an intensity that wasn't about safety or concern. There was no searching for weapons, no caution for danger. "Get out now, or we'll drag you out by force," he ordered, his voice a drill sergeant's bark. There was no room for negotiation, no explanation offered, no attempt at courtesy. The message was clear: comply or suffer the consequences. Delia met the order with silence. She refused to be hurried or intimidated. She was a black woman alone in her own car in the dead of night, and this unspoken question, the one no officer ever voiced aloud but always hung in the air, was the real reason behind the harassment. Yet Kless gave no reason. He gave no context, just force disguised as authority. Colburn nodded slightly, his lips curling into a smirk as he leaned in close to the driver's side window, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "We deal with all kinds," he said evenly, venom dripping from every word. "You're no different from those fake lawyers covering up crimes." His contempt was palpable, woven tightly with racial prejudice and hatred. No proof was necessary. Her skin color alone was enough for his judgment. Delia's gaze remained steady, her face calm but resolute. She refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she asked with quiet clarity, "Am I allowed to make a phone call?" Her eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding any flicker of weakness or distraction. To look away now would be to lose the mental ground she desperately clung to. Kless scoffed, a harsh, dry laugh snapping through the cold night like a metallic lid popping open in the dark. "Call who?" he spat, shaking his head in disbelief as he took a half-step back. "The funeral home." His words were low, not meant to be heard by others, but the venom was unmistakable. The implication was clear. She stood no chance if he chose to end this encounter with force. Colburn pulled out a worn notebook, flipping to a blank page and pretending to write while watching Delia with thinly veiled excitement. "License plate faded, suspicious location, non-compliance noted, full report," he said, his eyes glittering with something akin to pleasure. "This will be a night to remember." Delia said nothing more. She understood fully that reason and fairness held no power here. Her only weapons were her voice, her steely resolve, and an identity they had not yet realized she carried. A shield too fragile to reveal too soon, yet powerful enough to demand respect if wielded at the right moment. Then, a new light appeared from afar, not from another vehicle, but from Delia's phone, its camera already recording the scene unfolding outside. The soft glow from the screen cast a faint blue light across the dashboard, a silent witness to the injustice. When Kless noticed, the light reflecting off his uniform made him hesitate for a brief moment. "You're filming me?" he demanded, his voice rising with growing alarm. "Yes," Delia answered straight, her tone measured, almost detached. "And I will keep recording until you leave or provide an official reason." There was no need for elaboration. She knew exactly how Kless would react to the presence of evidence. "This is obstruction of justice," he shouted, stepping closer. "You think this video game will protect you? Social media won't save you when I use force." Delia held his gaze unflinchingly. "I think," she said firmly, "everything you say has already exceeded your duty." She paused, then added with calm precision, "Besides, you should know exactly who you're dealing with." Kless's eyes widened in surprise, the cocky menace draining for a moment as he stepped back slightly. Colburn remained silent, his mind turning over every possibility, all of which now threatened his fragile grip on control, but still, he was not ready to back down. "Who are you?" Colburn asked, masking the unease flickering beneath his bravado. Delia didn't answer right away. She glanced in the rearview mirror, where their flashlights flickered like distant storms. Then she turned back, eyes cold and steel-hard. "The only one here who knows the law and has the power to make you answer to the disciplinary committee." Kless laughed, loud and harsh, a bitter sound cutting through the night air. "Another crazy woman thinking she's the Supreme Court judge," he sneered. Looking at Colburn, he said, "Start it. Wait for her to call a sane?" Colburn nodded in agreement, then suddenly reached for Delia's car door handle and pulled. But before he could move forward, a faint click sounded. Delia had engaged the child's safety lock. Her eyes didn't shift. Her hand hovered over an emergency recording button she kept hidden, but ready. "This is an unlawful use of force," she said evenly, her voice a courtroom recital. "I've been recording and storing data for 5 minutes. This entire incident will be sent out if this device is taken." Colburn stepped back, suspicion flickering in his eyes for the first time that night. The officers fell silent, the cold wind blowing through the trees, sharper now, pricking nerves and stirring dry leaves in a soft rustle. Delia adjusted her phone calmly, never breaking eye contact. Then, one last time, she asked, "If you continue, I will have to identify myself and file a complaint tonight." "Who were you threatening?" Colburn said, voice faltering. "What are you to speak? Like you're in charge here." Delia didn't blink. "You don't need to believe me. Just keep your words so I can quote you exactly in the hearing." She paused, waiting, then added quietly, "I don't need to shout. I've been above you long enough not to." In that moment, there were no sirens, no flashing lights, no alarms blaring. But Colburn understood the line he'd crossed, a point of no return. Yet still, he did not stop, because he didn't yet know the full answer to the question he had mocked. "Call who? The funeral home?" Delia quietly sent a single message. "Under unwarranted stop. Broughton County Patrol, sending to Command Center. Video attached." She watched them, unblinking, waiting to see if they would retreat, or push so far that there would be no turning back. Colburn stepped back half a pace, the faint crunch of gravel under his boots barely audible beneath the oppressive stillness of the night. Slowly, deliberately, he drew his black Glock from the holster. The steel gleamed coldly in the beam of the flashlight that still stabbed into the car window, slicing through the shadows with an almost surgical precision. The night air was frigid, the temperature barely scraping 4 degrees, but the sudden flash of metal against glass sent a chill deeper than the cold. Without warning, without a single word of explanation, Colburn raised the gun and pressed the barrel flat against the glass, right before Delia Monroe's eye. Inside the car, Delia sat upright, her posture rigid but controlled, her eyes locked onto the cold steel barrel inches from her face, unwavering, unshaken but fully alert. Every muscle in her body tensed, prepared for what might come next, but she did not flinch. "Open the door or I'll shoot, and it'll be recorded as resisting arrest." His voice exploded through the still night air, stripped bare of any professional restraint, veins visibly twitching in his neck and temple. The growl behind the words was fueled more by personal hatred and pride than by any sense of official duty or protocol. Delia's expression did not change. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle but deliberate gesture, eyes never leaving the gun. With a smooth, practiced movement, her hand shifted to the phone resting in her lap. A quick swipe, and she activated the speakerphone, holding it steadily close to her mouth. "State Department of Justice, I need an urgent connection to the security assistant," she said, her tone calm, decisive, unshaken. The clarity of her voice in that moment made Colburn hesitate for a fraction of a second, his mind flickering with doubt, or perhaps the weight of unexpected consequences. But from the front of the car, Kless charged without hesitation, his anger raw and visibly threatened. "Turn off the phone. This isn't a political game," he shouted, yanking fiercely at the passenger door handle. But the door did not budge. It remained firmly locked. Kless's frustration mounted with every failed pull. Delia shifted her gaze slightly toward the small camera mounted on the rear-view mirror, the source of the live feed streaming the entire encounter. Her voice dropped lower, slower, each word deliberate and sharp, as if she were stamping them onto the two men's faces with unbreakable resolve. "I'm being threatened at gunpoint without cause, in the middle of the night, by a badge-wearing officer." The words were calm, without anger or panic, but they hung in the charged silence like a verdict. Around them, the chaos of the night seemed to fall away, leaving only the weight of her statement. Colburn held his stance, the gun still trained on her, but his grip slackened slightly. The barrel no longer pressed as hard against the glass. His gaze wavered, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. He was no longer certain that pulling the trigger now would be the right move. He faced a woman who refused to be cowed, fully aware of the mortal threat, but utterly unshaken, in a way he had never encountered before. "I'll count to 3, he hissed, voice low and threatening. "Open the door, or I'll proceed with emergency measures." Delia's voice was steady, almost dispassionate. "I've already sent the location and audio to Internal Affairs. They'll hear everything you just said." Kless kicked the front tire hard, grinding his teeth. His eyes were wild with frustration and rage. "You think recording means you'll win? That cheap social media stunt won't save you in these woods." Colburn glanced at Kless and then back at Delia. She remained still, phone in hand, the screen glowing softly in the dark. He felt increasingly pushed into uncharted territory, a territory where he no longer held clear control, yet still he did not relent. "You think you can threaten me with the law?" Colburn asked, voice dripping with scorn. "I've lived by the law since you were in preschool." Delia met his gaze squarely, no longer wary but resolute, her voice cold and measured. "I'm not threatening. I'm giving you a chance to avoid criminal charges." She tilted her head slightly. "Step back, lower your gun, give a proper reason for this stop or retreat." Colburn took a step back, then growled low in his throat, as if swatting away wounded pride. "No one gives me orders. What do you think you are?" Delia ignored the question entirely, turning back to the camera. Time, 3:14 a.m., Broughton County. Officer Colburn threatening a compliant civilian with a weapon. This is recording number 2. From the distance came the sound of a heavy engine, the low rumble growing steadily louder. An unmarked SUV with a state license plate appeared, rolling slowly toward them, its headlights casting long, ominous beams onto the trio standing beside the road. Colburn turned sharply toward the new vehicle, while Kless instinctively touched his belt, a move ambiguous in intent defensive or reactive. Delia didn't look toward the approaching vehicle. Her eyes remained fixed on the gun still pointed at her, the threat as real as the cold air biting through the cracked window. She kept recording, steady and relentless. Finally, Colburn reluctantly lowered his weapon, his hand clenched tightly as if wrestling with his bruised ego. He held her gaze through the glass a moment longer, then smirked, his voice dropping to a quiet murmur audible only to her. "Think you've won? Don't forget your skin color is the first thing people see." Delia said nothing. She tilted her head just enough so the camera could clearly capture her face, her features steady and unyielding, then said her final words into the microphone. "And the law is what they'll remember longer when the hearing begins." In the pale, wavering glow of the flashlight, she placed her phone back on the mount, adjusted the camera outward to capture the full scene unfolding beyond her windshield. Colburn stood there, caught in a liminal space, half retreating, half advancing, unsure whether to keep playing the role of oppressor or start reckoning with the depth of the hole he dug for himself, fingers still hovering near the trigger. The internal dashcam mounted on the windshield started blinking, a small red dot glowing sharply against the cold blackness of the night like a blood signal warning of an imminent storm. The bright, pulsating light cut through the dense fog that curled low over the road, making the mist shimmer faintly in the flashlight's harsh glare. The flash reflected off the glass revealed every line, every crease on Colburn's face, lit up under the harsh white light like a portrait of rage and frustration. He blinked rapidly, then widened his eyes as realization dawned. The light wasn't from some distant car or passing emergency vehicle. It was the dash cam, recording everything in real time, capturing the raw, unfiltered reality of the encounter. Colburn hissed, a sound sharp and guttural like a cornered animal desperate to lash out. He leaned forward, the beam of the flashlight slicing across the interior of Delia's car as he pressed his face close to the window. His voice was rough, thick with anger and frustration, almost strangled by the tension. "Turn off that camera now." Delia didn't respond. She remained perfectly still, her posture unyielding. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle but purposeful move, making sure the camera's view captured both her calm, composed face and the gun Colburn had pressed against the glass mere inches from her. Her eyes were steady, unblinking, reflecting nothing but determination. Across the front of the car, Carter Kless spun on his heel and strode purposefully back toward their patrol vehicle. The gravel crunched sharply under his boots. He yanked open the back door and rummaged inside, his movements quick but precise. After a few seconds, he emerged holding a pair of handcuffs and a small black device, a radio or some sort of scanner, Delia assumed. His eyes never strayed from her car, as if he were searching for any sign, any twitch, any movement that might give him the pretext he desperately needed to escalate the situation. "You're illegally recording a law enforcement operation," Kless said as he tightened the cuffs, stepping back into the pool of flashlight glare. His tone was rushed, clipped, not out of fear of Delia, but because the vividness of the clip, the undeniable proof it contained, rattled his usual confidence. "That's interference with procedure." Delia shifted her face slightly toward the camera light, the pale beam casting a cold strip across her cheek. She opened her phone with steady fingers and tapped the save icon, making sure the recording was securely stored. Then she spoke, her voice clear, firm, unwavering, leaving no room for interruption or argument. "Give me your names and badge numbers. The law requires you to identify yourselves when requested by a citizen during duty." She didn't shout or rush the words. Instead, each phrase echoed through the cold forest mist like a legal decree carved into stone. Colburn's reaction was swift and violent. He slammed his fist hard against the glass, the entire window frame rattling under the impact. "Here, I'm the law," he bellowed, rage stripping away any pretense of professionalism. "Who the hell are you to demand that?" His voice no longer aimed to intimidate. It was the accidental slip of a man realizing he was losing control but refusing to admit defeat. The weight of the moment pressed on him. He couldn't comprehend how a lone black woman, sitting quietly in her car at night, could remain so unflinching while a gun was pressed against the glass, cuffs ready, threats hanging thick in the air. Kless stood a half step behind Colburn, shifting forward, his gaze flickering nervously between Colburn and the camera lens trained relentlessly on them. His hand froze midair, the usual routine lines from daily patrols, the scripted, practiced words halted by that unblinking red dot they couldn't silence with a trigger pull. Delia didn't look away. Her fingers moved methodically, saving the recording again, sealing the digital evidence. She stated clearly, without hesitation, "This video is backed up to the cloud. Any further actions will serve as court evidence." She leaned back slightly in her seat, maintaining equal distance from both windows, as if asserting an invisible boundary no one could cross. "If you don't provide your identification as required, I will file a complaint with the federal inspector's office first thing this morning." Colburn smirked bitterly, his lips curling into a crooked, resentful laugh. "Do you think anyone cares about your complaint?" he sneered, tapping the glass thrice, like warning a stubborn child. "We deal with hundreds like you every year. Half don't even get to file complaints before they get prosecuted back." His words dripped with cynical dismissal and menace. "If you want to live peacefully, open the door quietly. If not, you know the outcome." Delia's eyes never left the camera's lens, as if the outside scene was nothing but a blurred backdrop to her unwavering gaze. She raised her head, voice steady and sharp, then, for the first time that night, asked back a question that stopped the moment cold. "Have you ever been sued?" Colburn blinked, stunned into silence. The question hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. He didn't answer right away, perhaps because he hadn't anticipated being confronted like this, while pressing cuffs and a gun against a woman's car window in the dead of night. Delia pressed on, relentless. Or should I remind you of George Levine, 2017, a man pinned to the ground despite showing valid ID? Her voice was firm, but not accusatory, simply matter of fact. Or Mallory Fitch, a woman arrested for stopping too long outside a pharmacy while calling for her mother's ambulance. Colburn squinted, silent. Kless stepped back for the first time that night, eyes briefly dropping away from her like a man caught off guard. Those names, those cases, were not just stories. They were real, documented in internal reports and court filings. They were echoes of reckoning, shadows of accountability. You should know, Delia concluded with quiet authority. I'm not just the recorder, I am the judge. Her voice dropped to a calm, commanding tone. And if you don't back away from my car within 10 seconds, the one answering questions tomorrow morning won't be me. Colburn's response came as a heavy, violent punch against the door frame. The glass didn't shatter, but the sharp crack cut through the night like a scream. All right, Monroe, he growled, voice low and threatening. You want to play by the rules? I'll give you rules. But don't blame me if they kill you with your own words. Kless glanced at Colburn, then back at the camera, the tension unspoken but unmistakable between them. Neither spoke further, but they knew every passing second, every move, was turning into a living indictment. Behind that closed car door wasn't a lone woman. It was a symbol of legal power, silently waiting for them to slip. The prison handshake didn't come from bars, it came from arrogance, caught on camera. Tonight, the first fingers were already tightening around the throat of injustice. The sound of tires striking the cold, wet road echoed faintly from the far end of the hill, breaking the tense stillness that had settled over the forest road. The dark blue SUV appeared, smoothly, silently gliding up the incline without sirens, flashing lights, or any other warning. Its windows were fully tinted, making the interior impossible to see. It rolled to a stop close to the roadside as if it had been waiting there, concealed in the shadows all along. The quiet arrival was ominous, a silent thunder rolling in to change the course of the night. Both Colburn and Kless immediately turned around, their faces shifting from anger to something more complicated, dread. The realization settled over them like a sudden winter frost. This was no ordinary patrol backup, no local officers or rescue teams rushing to assist. This was a federal law enforcement vehicle, and the situation had escalated beyond their control. The tension that had gripped them all suddenly twisted into something colder and sharper. A man stepped out of the SUV, dressed in plain clothes, dark jacket, no badge visible, but his demeanor was unmistakably official. He moved with a calm, calculated tension that spoke of authority, but also a readiness for confrontation. His eyes were sharp as he approached Delia's car. Upon seeing her face clearly in the faint light, his expression froze, surprise creeping in beneath the usual composure he wore like armor. "Madam Monroe?" His voice was low, steady, but with a hint of disbelief, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the calm woman in the car with the name he'd just spoken. Delia nodded lightly in confirmation, her eyes never flicking toward Colburn, for she knew she didn't need to. Her authority radiated from within, unaffected by the presence of the officers or the flicker of gunmetal in the flashlight's beam. Behind her, Ray Colburn stood motionless, as if punched in the chest by an invisible fist. His eyes darted between the approaching agent and Delia, breath quick and tight, as if the air itself had been squeezed from his lungs. "You know him?" Colburn stammered, the question a desperate grasp for the last strands of control slipping rapidly through his fingers. Delia's voice was cold, layered with authority that brooked no challenge. "He knows me." Her head rose, eyes steady and fearless beneath the glare of the headlights. "I am the Attorney General of this state." The air seemed to freeze instantly, the words falling like stones into the tense silence. Kless stepped back twice, face paling, mouth parting in shock, before freezing midsection like a machine short-circuiting. "Attorney General?" His voice barely above a whisper, a breath caught in disbelief. He staggered back further, as if that title burned away the false authority he once believed he wielded. Colburn's gaze flicked to the federal agent, panic sharpening his features. He scrambled desperately to piece together a response, a denial, a rescue plan, anything. Then the worst possible line escaped his lips, exposing the brittle mask of control he had worn so thin. She's an imposter. The word she flew out like a final desperate throw, laying bare his prejudice and ripping apart the facade of legal legitimacy he thought protected him. The federal agent said nothing in response. He didn't ask for proof or verification because none was needed. He raised his hand slowly and pressed the radio clipped to his shoulder. His voice was low but firm, each word carefully enunciated, as if reading an official report into the record. Station 9. Armed threat against a high-ranking official. Request backup and lockdown of this entire area. There was no surprise in his tone, no hesitation. This was a standard federal emergency response protocol, a signal that the situation had officially escalated beyond local jurisdiction. Delia stepped out of her car with deliberate calm, the door closing behind her with a soft yet firm click that echoed in the night like a punctuation mark. No one moved to stop her. No one dared. Under the cold, steady beam of the agent's headlights, she stood tall and silent, pillar of unyielding authority. The cold wind swept through the pine trees, howling in broken cries and rattling the branches overhead, but it could not drown out the quiet sound of handcuffs dropping to the ground. Kless, unconsciously shaken, let the cuffs fall, then bent down to pick them up, as if that simple act might somehow hide the fear knotting in his throat. Colburn remained rooted in place on the roadside, eyes still fixed on Delia, as if desperately searching the recesses of his memory for any case, news story, or administrative file in which her name might have appeared, a name he had never cared to know until now. He did not recognize her because he had never expected to meet someone like her here, in this moment, on this lonely stretch of road. That was his first and fatal mistake. Now everything was shifting into a criminal report. The agent moved forward to photograph the scene, the flashlight beam casting stark highlights on every face, every grimace, every twitch. Delia's phone continued recording, unblinking and merciless. Colburn was no longer surrounded by enemies. He was surrounded by the very legal authority he had thought himself part of, but which now stood firmly against him. A voice crackled over the radio, sharp and clear. Coordinates confirmed. Backup units approaching from the north. The agent nodded slowly, eyes never leaving Colburn's frozen figure. Hold position. No one leaves the scene. The command was clear and absolute, delivered without threat because no threats were necessary anymore. The truth had made everything urgent. Delia turned to the agent. I need a vehicle to take me to the state headquarters. I will investigate this matter within my authority. The agent nodded in response, opening the rear door of the SUV and inviting her inside. No one blocked her path. No one dared ask a question. As the door closed behind her, the space seemed to fall silent with a unique sound, the sound of power that needed no shouting, no demonstration, no proving, only presence. Colburn remained standing in the middle of the road, gun still holstered but his body drained, a hollow shell of the man who had believed that pulling the trigger meant winning. But he had forgotten something crucial, that some people don't need to fight with their hands or weapons because they embody the law itself. Tonight, the man who had thought he could squeeze the trigger was strangled by the weight of a name he had never expected to face. Delia Monroe did not need to say it again. She had already forced the law to look directly into her face, and in that moment, the law had no choice but to recognize who truly held the power. A truck with out-of-state plates was parked nearly 100 meters from the scene, positioned deliberately far enough to avoid drawing attention, yet close enough to capture every subtle movement unfolding within the frame. Its windows were slightly fogged from the cold night air, but the dashboard was clear and well lit by the faint glow of a phone mounted facing forward. For 8 uninterrupted minutes, the driver inside neither intervened nor altered what he was recording. There was no editing, no commentary dubbed over the footage, just raw, unfiltered reality. What the camera caught was far from a routine traffic stop. It was a collision of two worlds, one armed and suspicious, the other composed and lawful. The footage showed a stark, unvarnished confrontation, a struggle for power framed against the cold backdrop of a quiet forest road. The clip was posted on Reddit with a caption that read bluntly, "AG pointed at with a gun because of skin color. This is not a movie trailer." It was an instant call to attention that took on a life of its own, quickly growing beyond the control of any single person. At first, the video gained modest traction, several hundred likes, a few dozen shares, but within an hour it exploded across the internet like wildfire. Major forums and social media platforms picked it up and amplified it. From Twitter to TikTok, Facebook to YouTube, the clip spread relentlessly, racing through digital channels at a speed no one could have predicted. Within 3 hours, it had racked up over 1 million views. Short clips were edited and reinsert, chilling lines echoing in countless variations. "Here, I am the law. Who do you think you are demanding that?" And, most powerful of all, "I am the Attorney General of this state." These words were stretched out against slow, haunting music, each phrase lingering to draw out the weight of the moment. The online community required no explanation. The footage told a story that transcended language. The hashtag #SheIsTheLaw first appeared on Twitter, coined by a Haitian-American activist who recognized the moment's gravity. It was quickly adopted by dozens of verified accounts, lawyers, civil rights groups, journalists, and everyday users alike. A young lawyer tweeted, "You don't need to know the law to survive unless you're a person of color, but if you do know the law, they're ready to kill you for it." That tweet alone was shared over 200,000 times in the hours that followed. While many viewers remained confused about the full context of the event, one thing was clear to the crowd. A black woman, late at night, was threatened at gunpoint by state police. Minutes later, it was revealed she held the highest legal office in the state's justice system. The incident exposed a raw wound, one that touched on race, authority, and systemic hypocrisy. In a small, dimly lit office at the State Media Data Center, independent journalist Jaden Cortez watched every frame of the clip with intense focus. Known for his cautious approach and commitment to accuracy, Jaden refused to share anything until the footage was fully verified, a rule he had adopted after numerous fake news scandals plagued the media landscape. But as the woman calmly declared, "I am the Attorney General of this state," and he cross-checked her image against the official personnel records online, the truth became unmistakably clear. There was no room for doubt. The woman in the video was Delia Monroe. Jaden didn't wait for the scheduled broadcast slot. Fueled by frustration accumulated from years of following similar cases, often ignored or buried by mainstream outlets, he immediately wrote an article piercing to the core of the state's power structure. The headline was one simple, devastating question. If the law can be threatened with murder, what hope is there for ordinary people? His piece was free of flowery language or unnecessary drama. It laid out the facts with brutal clarity, describing each action, each frame, and each line of dialogue. The article concluded with a hard-hitting final sentence. This was not a traffic stop. This was a declaration. Who holds power to survive? In less than 40 minutes after publication, the article topped national trending lists. It was read and shared by lawyers, students, activists, journalists, and even legislators, some of whom held grudges against Delia Monroe personally. None could remain silent. A wave of outrage surged through social media and newsrooms alike. The focus wasn't just about race. It was about the system's glaring hypocrisy. If the state's top legal officer could be targeted just for not fitting some imagined standard citizen mold, what chance did those without cameras, without identity, or without voices have? Meanwhile, inside the state attorney general's office, a routine meeting was underway. A young assistant entered hurriedly, phone in hand, pale-faced and trembling slightly. Whispering urgently into the ear of the press chief, the assistant's words instantly stilled the room. The news spread like wildfire, by word of mouth in less than 10 minutes. One voice said quietly, The clip's out. Delia's being threatened with a gun. The whole country is watching. Another asked nervously, "Has it been verified?" "No need," came the firm reply. Her voice, her face, every word, clearer than any record. Within 30 minutes, the office drafted a statement, brief and unapologetic. It read, "We are addressing a serious incident involving an officer during last night's event. The Attorney General's office is cooperating with federal authorities to ensure all legal violations are strictly dealt with." The statement was released across all channels, press emails, TV bulletins, and the AG's official social media account. Many expected Delia to appear immediately, to speak, explain, or defend herself, but she did not. Her silence only amplified the viral effect. People poured over every second of the raw, unedited footage. 8 minutes of truth unfiltered and unstaged. The moment became a symbol, a rallying cry for justice and accountability. A famous actor shared the clip on Twitter with the words, "Not a movie, no soundtrack, no extras." That same day, Google Trends lit up red across 5 regions in the United States, with searches for Delia Monroe blazing to the top. People weren't searching to scrutinize. They were searching to understand. To understand how a woman could remain so calm with a gun pointed at her, how a system could allow such a thing, and why America still hadn't learned from the shocks of the past. That night, for the first time in years, the legal system felt questioned, not through protests or lawsuits, but by 8 minutes of dashboard camera footage. At the storm's center was a woman who never needed to shout, yet the entire nation fell silent to listen. The studio lights blazed harshly, illuminating the 3 black leather chairs positioned deliberately opposite the main camera lens. The set of the primetime news show, State Now, was designed for gravity and impact, and tonight's broadcast carried the weight of a nation's unease. As the show opened, the screen behind the host flickered to life, playing a condensed video clip carefully trimmed from the original 8 minutes of raw footage down to 2 intense minutes, just enough to send a chill down any viewer's spine. The camera work was deliberate and unhurried. It slowly panned from the close-up of the cold steel barrel of Officer Colburn's gun pressed flat against the driver's side window, capturing the tension etched in every frame. Then the footage cut sharply to the defining moment, the calm declaration, "I am the Attorney General of this state," spoken with unwavering resolve by Delia Monroe. The screen snapped back to the studio just as the words faded, revealing the host bowing his head slightly, as if to steady himself and catch a breath after the haunting replay. To the host's left sat Melvin Harris, a retired officer with over 20 years of service in the Highway Patrol. His face was stern, edged with the weariness of years spent navigating the complex realities of law enforcement. To the host's right was Nora Cheng, a legal policy analyst known for her sharp critiques of systemic injustice. Between them was Professor Isaac Reed, an academic who had dedicated his career to studying police misconduct and reform. The host began slowly, choosing each word with care. "We are facing a situation no one can pretend not to see. A state attorney general held at gunpoint by police inside her own car on vague suspicion." His eyes settled on Melvin Harris. "You worked alongside patrol teams for many years. What's your take after watching this clip?" Harris closed his eyes briefly, as if drawing on personal memories that weighed heavily on him. Then he opened them and looked directly into the camera, voice low and measured. "I know Colburn," he said quietly. "In 2019, I wrote an internal report on him. It detailed an incident where he threatened a group of black youths near a gas station. He's been the subject of multiple complaints for abusing his power against minorities, yet he has never faced official discipline." The statement dropped like a stone into still water, ripples spreading through the studio and across the broadcast. The host paused for a moment before continuing, his voice barely above a whisper. "If she weren't the Attorney General, Would we be discussing an assault today? Or would we be reviewing a death report instead? No one answered immediately. The question hung heavily in the air. It didn't require an answer. The question was the answer. Nora Chang clasped her hands tightly, leaned forward slightly, and spoke with decisive clarity. What we are witnessing is a textbook example of what scholars call badge racism. The police officers didn't act because she posed a danger. They acted because she defied their expectations of who belongs and who does not. When Delia remained calm, they saw defiance. When she recorded the interaction, they saw resistance, all because of her skin color and her confidence. Two things that scared them. She fixed the camera with a piercing gaze, her voice sharpening. If you are a black woman, you are not allowed to show knowledge. You must be obedient or you become a target. Isaac Reed sat silently, flipping through his notes as the conversation unfolded. When he finally spoke, his voice was grave. What chills me most isn't that Colburn drew his gun. It's that even after knowing her identity, after hearing her declaration, he still did not stop. This isn't a mistake. It's a belief deeply ingrained. The law is something to wield at will. When Colburn says, "The law is me," he means it. That's the problem. The host lowered his head slowly, then looked back at the camera and said softly, "She did not scream, but she shook the entire system." That phrase, uttered live on air, was clipped within minutes and shared widely across social media platforms. It was like a steel nail driven straight into the rusting machinery of justice. People started adding the line to the original clip, to images of Delia, and to political commentary across the internet, not as praise, but as a declaration. Silence is not weakness. Calmness is not submission. After the show aired, quotes from the discussion were cut out, highlighted, and circulated with increasing frequency. A top national news website posted an editorial comment. This is no longer about a procedural traffic stop. This is a survival test for the legal system. Another reposted Nora Chang's poignant words. She does not need forgiveness. She needs to be heard because she spoke in the most dangerous way, by existing. Delia Monroe herself remained silent. There were no official statements from her, no television interviews, no public letters. But the viral nature of the clip ensured that the story spread relentlessly, the message growing stronger in her silence. Social media users continued to share the video under a single unifying title. She did not scream, but shook the whole system. Within that quiet, collective moment of reckoning, all eyes turned toward the Attorney General's office, not expecting an apology, but watching with bated breath who would dare step forward to confront the truth so brazenly broadcast nationwide. That afternoon, the central press room at the State Attorney General's office was uncharacteristically quiet. There were no TV cameras crowded in rows, no bright backdrop emblazoned with the agency's name, no reception desk cluttered with papers or flowers. Instead, a single high-backed chair sat squarely in the middle of the polished wooden floor, facing a plain gray wall that had never before been seen in any public statement. The entire setup was stripped down to its barest essentials, no spectacle, no fanfare. Delia Monroe entered the room and took her place without hesitation. She carried no script, no papers, and was not wired with a lapel microphone. The only thing in front of her was a lone camera, operated by an internal communications assistant whose quiet professionalism went unnoticed. No visual effects, no elaborate preparation had been made. The weight of the moment rested solely on her presence and her words. When Delia looked directly into the camera lens, the chaotic noise swirling through social media seemed to pause, if only for a few absolute seconds. She began with a voice that was steady and sure, neither too loud nor too soft, not trembling, but forged through the countless hours she had spent in courtrooms, arguing for justice. "I am not asking for special rights," she said plainly. "I am asking for fairness, just like any other citizen living in this country." She paused, eyes unwavering from the lens. "And if the fairness I speak of threatens you, then the problem isn't me, but your definition of power." There was no applause, no clicking cameras, no whispered conversations from behind the scenes, only a steady gaze, clear and sharp, as if piercing right through the glass of the camera and striking the viewer directly. "I once believed that degrees and titles would keep me safe," she continued. "I once trusted that if I served the law would protect me. But that night, when a gun was pressed against my face by a badge wearer, I realized those beliefs were not meant for someone like me." Her eyes shifted, becoming colder, firmer, removing any hint of assumed meekness or submission. "I don't need to shout. I am the system they fear most, a black woman with the power to prosecute them, not because I seek revenge, but because I was elected to preserve justice for those who have no chance to step into a courtroom." Delia did not raise her fist in defiance. She did not cry or recount every harrowing detail captured on video. She did not name Colburn or Kless, nor did she address the viral footage directly. She spoke only of principles, of simmering fear embedded in the structure, and of the price anyone with skin like hers understands, even without a gun pressed to their head. The video was 9 minutes long, no music overlaid, no fancy transitions, just her voice and presence, pure and unfiltered. Within 30 minutes of posting the video on the official state account, it was reshared by leading figures in politics, journalism, and culture. Michelle Obama tweeted, "This calm is a weapon no one can take away." Stacey Abrams posted on Instagram, "I want my daughter to learn how to look power straight in the eye, like her." 14 members of Congress, 3 governors, and hundreds of journalists across the nation shared the speech, amplifying it with a hashtag that flooded every platform. On Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, every line from the clip was sliced into short captions and spread like a narration of a historic moment. People stopped calling it a press conference. They called it testimony, a declaration witnessed, understood, and felt deeply. One top comment on social media read, "She is the reason bigots are silenced." That phrase soon appeared printed on t-shirts, phone wallpapers, even handwritten on protest boards outside high schools and college campuses across the country. The black community hailed her as a living symbol of survival, a beacon of endurance. The legal community called her a mirror, reflecting both hope and the harsh truths embedded in the system. But Delia never saw herself as an icon. She had spoken up because she knew that if she didn't, someone else would be buried without a record, their story lost in silence and erasure. That very evening, national news broadcasts aired 3 key excerpts from her speech, verbatim, without edits or commentary. Even mainstream networks, typically cautious with anything touching on race or power, could not ignore it. A veteran anchor opened his segment by saying, "There are times this country changes because of a shout, but today it changes because of a look." As cities across the nation lit up with awareness and urgency, community meetings sprang up, policy rooms opened doors for dialogue, and ordinary people began conversations they had long avoided. Yet, through all this, Delia left the press room quietly. She did not wave or pose for cameras. She walked back to her office, sat at her desk as she always did, and continued reviewing forgotten case files and overlooked documents. Her voice was not a weapon in the conventional sense, but that was precisely why everyone who had once pointed a gun at her had to lower their hands and listen, not because they were forced, but because they understood. She didn't need weapons to create change. She only needed the truth, and the courage to look straight ahead once, calmly, firmly, and without fear. The main hall of Princeton University had been transformed overnight from a standard academic venue into something that resembled a political arena. The stage lights blazed down like the spotlight on a campaign rally, highlighting every speaker's face with stark intensity. The rows of seats were filled beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation and tension. Originally, the event had been planned as a routine seminar titled "The Boundaries of Law Enforcement," meant to foster dialogue on the complexities of policing and community relations. But after the incident involving Delia Monroe, now a subject of national conversation, the focus shifted dramatically. Every question, every comment, now orbited around a single searing question. Does justice depend on status and skin color? He spoke, thus dominating. The crowd was a diverse mix of students, faculty, and local community members, the energy electric and raw. As the discussion unfolded, A third-year student rose from the center of the packed room. Richard Bowen was tall, with neatly combed blonde hair, pale skin, and a confident posture. His voice was calm, steady, but carried a challenging edge, cutting through the murmur like a sharp blade. "If she weren't the state attorney general," he began, pausing just enough to let the weight of his words sink in, "would we even be discussing this? Or is it only because of her power and position that this attention exists?" A hush fell over the room. The question struck deep, an uncomfortable truth masked as inquiry. There were murmurs, some affirmations, some denials, but mostly uneasy glances exchanged among the audience. The moderator was about to step in to redirect the conversation, but before he could utter a word, a young woman near the back of the room stood abruptly. She was a student of color, dressed simply in a black t-shirt, her face bare of makeup, but her eyes were fierce, sharp, and unyielding. She locked onto Richard's gaze with a stare that cut through the room's tension like a laser beam. "Do you think someone like me," she said, slowly, voice steady and cold, "needs to wear a robe and badge to be alive?" She lifted her hand, palm open and facing upward, as though offering proof in the palm of her hand. "No one asks for privilege, but this time," she continued, "there was a camera, and a woman of color who didn't run, didn't beg, didn't wait for rescue. She stayed. That's what scares you the most." Richard opened his mouth, seemingly ready to respond, but before he could speak, applause erupted from the left corner of the room. It was tentative at first, soft taps on tables, but it quickly swelled into whistles and cheers. The hosting professor nodded knowingly, but made no attempt to stop the spontaneous tribute. The applause was a raw acknowledgement of truth spoken at a moment that demanded courage. By the next morning, the debate clip was all over social media, reposted and recirculated with the title, "Justice doesn't need a crown, it needs a camera." The hashtag Delia Monroe surged once again, echoing through Twitter timelines, Facebook groups, TikTok videos, and Reddit threads. People were rallying behind the message, embracing the idea that visibility, not privilege, was the ultimate protector of rights. As the momentum grew, right-wing media channels pushed back vehemently. One national radio commentator shouted into his microphone with raw outrage, "She's using privilege, emotions, and social media to put the police on trial before the court of public opinion." His voice was hoarse, dripping with indignation. On a popular late-night talk show, the segment opened with the chilling footage of Delia being held at gunpoint, followed by a stark cut to her walking into a TV studio, her expression unreadable and resolute. Large, bold text flashed on the screen. "Attorney General or Queen of Justice?" The segment's host and guests debated heatedly whether Delia was exploiting her position to craft an untouchable public image, using the incident to build a fortress of symbolic power rather than addressing the deeper issues. Throughout all the noise, Delia Monroe remained silent. No press conferences, no reaction clips, no excuses. Her official social media account posted but a single line at noon, simple and stark. "No need to win, just reclaim what's right." That phrase quickly transcended its digital origins. It was printed on posters at rallies, emblazoned on travel mugs carried by students and activists alike, quoted in essays and lectures and philosophy classes, and etched deeply into the consciousness of those who held power at the local level. Among them was the police chief of a neighboring county, who sat alone late one night, watching the post scroll across his screen. He stopped chewing his dinner, leaned back in his chair, and sighed softly, almost unconsciously. Another sleepless night. The ripple effect was undeniable. Delia's calm defiance had become a beacon for many, a symbol of unyielding strength in the face of systemic fear and intimidation. For some, her words were a call to action. For others, a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths. Yet Delia herself did not claim heroism. She simply saw the necessity to speak, to stand firm in a moment when silence would have meant erasure. Across campuses, community centers, and legislative halls, discussions ignited that would have otherwise languished in silence. The seminar at Princeton was replicated in cities nationwide. Young activists learned that justice was not just about laws written on paper, but about who is seen and heard. The old paradigms began to crack, revealing fractures in a system too long ignored. In this shifting landscape, Delia's silence spoke volumes. Her refusal to engage with the noise, to fight back with fiery rhetoric or emotional appeals, forced the nation to listen on a different level. The challenge she posed was not loud or dramatic, but profoundly unsettling, a reminder that justice, fairness, and human dignity are not privileges granted by status, but rights owed to every person. That afternoon at Princeton was not just a seminar, it was a turning point. The question posed by Richard Bowen, and answered so powerfully by the young woman of color, would echo in classrooms and courtrooms for years to come. Does justice depend on the robes we wear, the badges we carry, or the color of our skin? And if it does, what hope remains for those without privilege, without power, without visibility? The answer was already being written, line by line, voice by voice, by those who dared to look straight into the face of truth and say, calmly and firmly, no need to win, just reclaim what's right. At the state legal office, stark white lights flooded the glass wall, where a series of security camera images were displayed in sharp, unforgiving detail. Among them, one photograph had recently been enlarged and enhanced by the digital department's most advanced software. The image froze a moment in time with chilling clarity. Officer Colburn, Glock 19, raised and pointed directly at the glass, separating him from Delia Monroe. His face was taut with tension, eyes narrowed as if facing down a threat far graver than the woman calmly seated inside the car. Delia's posture was unyielding, hands resting firmly on the steering wheel, her neck angled slightly to one side, eyes fixed straight ahead. She did not tremble, she did not blink. No words escaped her lips. The stillness captured in that single frame rippled through the room with a cold electric shock that sent shivers down many spines. In the sixth-floor meeting room, a state council member who was a former Iraq veteran lowered his hand from the polished oak table and whispered into the microphone, barely audible. If that was me in the car, I'd be dead from reacting too fast. His voice carried weight, though the words were not officially recorded. The sentiment hung heavy in the air and was absorbed by four others in the room. They responded with silence, eyes turning collectively toward a second screen where a new piece of evidence had just been fully decoded, complete with sound. This second video showed Colburn approaching the car, his gun still holstered. Behind him stood Officer Kless, his voice raw and hoarse over the captured audio. "I'll show him what it feels like to get buried." The recording was pristine, unedited, and uncorrupted, a stark testament to the reality unfolding just yards from the camera's gaze. A legal assistant swallowed nervously before quickly archiving the recording in the internal case files. Within 6 minutes, the entire record, along with both videos, was classified as Level 4, urgent legislative action required. Yet on the other side of the political spectrum, opposing currents began to surge. A prominent right-wing television station released an editorial titled "Delia Monroe, From Prosecutor to Revolutionary Icon." The piece framed Monroe as a divisive figure, casting her as someone transforming from a legal enforcer to a symbol of radical change. Conservative public opinion reacted swiftly and fiercely. A group of activists and police supporters convened a press conference outside the state legislative building, holding signs emblazoned with slogans such as, "Law doesn't serve emotion. Don't retaliate against the system with power." A spokesperson spoke emphatically into the microphone, "We demand the investigation be halted immediately. immediately. This reeks of executive interference, a deliberate attempt to crush police freedom and morale. Inside the council chambers, debate erupted with heated passion. A representative from Goldwell County slammed his fist on the table, his voice reverberating through the room. This isn't about her identity. It's about how a law enforcer used force without just cause. Another representative, more cautious, interjected, I agree with the need to investigate. But if we let the public keep voting emotionally, we risk losing control of the entire state system. Though the meeting room doors were firmly closed, the heated exchange did not stay private for long. A nearby reporter, working on technical repairs, caught snippets of the conversation through a ventilation panel and discreetly recorded the fragments. Within 3 hours, the story leaked to the public, and the first local online headlines screamed, "Pointed gun, truth negotiated behind closed doors?" That very evening, the state television broadcast breaking news coverage. The Attorney General's office confirmed receipt of multiple requests to initiate a public hearing into the incident. Data had been collected and verified from 3 independent sources, reinforcing the gravity of the situation. While some politicians reiterated the message that no one is above the law, a more cynical undercurrent began to emerge, that no one, not even the law itself, stands beyond the reach of a gun's barrel. For 2 days following the broadcast, Delia Monroe made no public appearances or statements. The silence was deafening, fueling speculation and debate. Then, from the official AG's social media page, came a brief, carefully worded post. Justice doesn't need to shout, it needs to shine like a camera in the woods. Public reaction was immediate and explosive, not because the words were new, but because after that photograph, no one dared claim there is no evidence. The photo was undeniable, a stark, vivid capture of a moment that symbolized systemic failures and the peril faced by those who dared stand firm. Across newsrooms, social media platforms, and legal circles, the post was shared relentlessly. Commentators analyzed every nuance. Activists mobilized new campaigns. Legal experts debated the implications. The phrase became a rallying cry, a testament to the power of visibility, transparency, and unflinching truth in the fight for justice. Within the halls of power, conversations shifted. Lawmakers who had once hesitated now felt pressure mounting to act decisively. Internal investigations accelerated. Federal authorities signaled increased involvement. The photo and videos became central pieces in a broader conversation about accountability, police conduct, and the precarious balance between power and justice. For many, the image of Colburn's gun pressed against Delia Monroe's car window was no longer just a photo. It was a symbol. It embodied the stakes of systemic injustice, the risks of unchecked authority, and the resilience of those who dared to stand their ground. And through it all, Delia Monroe remained a figure of composed strength, a silent catalyst whose courage to face the gun without flinching had ignited a storm no one could ignore. The closed meeting room on the 12th floor of the federal building had no nameplate, no announcement board outside, only a heavy curtain drawn all the way to the floor, and the lingering smell of overbrewed coffee. 6 people sat around a dark wooden table, each with a purple inked file stamped Federal Infested Coordination in front of them. On the wall-mounted screen, a map of Broughton County appeared, dotted with blinking red points, each marking an unjustified vehicle stop incident from the past 2 years, a number that raised serious concerns. A female DOJ agent spoke first, her tone dry and sharp, her eyes not focusing on anyone, but rather on the issue at hand. All 3 officers involved directly in the Monroe case have prior complaints, yet their files were never properly escalated. A man in a wrinkled shirt interrupted. "Serious. I need to be clear. Are we investigating because the person threatened with a gun is the Attorney General, or because public pressure demands it?" The female agent nodded slightly, replying with a weighty sentence. "We investigate because this has happened enough times that it can no longer be called an individual error." Next, a lawyer from the Attorney General's office turned on a secondary screen to show Ray Colburn's internal investigation testimony. In the video, Colburn sat rigidly, hands clasped, eyes darting nervously. "I didn't know who she was. I was just following the reasonable suspicion procedure." The video paused right after his statement, then switched to footage of Colburn shouting through a glass window, "I don't need a reason to check a suspicious person." The screen went dark. No one in the room spoke. After a moment of silence, a man's voice broke in low and steady. "So what exactly is this procedure? Stopping vehicles with no clear violation? Labeling black drivers as suspects just because they're driving?" The state lawyer's office later released an internal audit. In a 3-week review, they uncovered 5 other vehicle stops that victims had reported as abuses of power, all of which had been scrubbed from the official investigation system before reaching any complaint stage. All the victims were black women. One was an elementary school teacher who had been forced to the ground in a supermarket parking lot on suspicion of drug trafficking, when all she carried was a student-grade book. A young FBI agent pulled up an internal report about the routine transfers within departments designed to avoid cross-investigation. The report detailed how some officers who were complained about were reassigned, not punished, but moved to erase trails of accountability. The female agent tapped the table sharply, emphasizing every word. "Comrades can't be shields for accomplices." The meeting ended with the Department of Justice demanding special access to internal data from neighboring counties to broaden the investigation. An internal memo was sent to all investigative units. Do not investigate based on the victim's rank. Investigate based on the system's level of recidivism. Delia Monroe had not spoken publicly yet, but every new recording, every newly declassified piece of evidence struck at the protective structure built among those wearing badges. The next day, legal news outlets ran headlines that sounded like warnings. If every trigger pull is justified by procedure, it's time to rewrite the procedure. A public hearing was scheduled, not for the victims, but for the system itself. From the meeting and internal findings, it was clear that the issue was not a handful of individuals, but a deep, systemic problem quietly thriving within the ranks of law enforcement. The mishandling of complaint files, the abuse of power against society's most vulnerable, and the personnel transfers designed to dodge responsibility all formed a dangerous cycle that the law must break. This was no longer about isolated mistakes, but a foundational issue rooted in the system and how it operates, how it should uphold fairness and transparency. This story marked a turning point as the public refused to accept half-hearted explanations, demanding real change in how authorities treat citizens, especially minority groups who have long suffered injustice. The scheduled hearing offered a chance to clarify everything, forcing the system to confront a tough question: does it still deserve the public's trust? The answer wouldn't come from words alone, but through concrete actions, meaningful changes in procedures, investigation practices, and complaint handling, so that no one is dismissed or mistreated due to their race or circumstance. This is a moment for the system to reflect, not just for Delia Monroe or any individual victim, but for society as a whole, for true justice and a future where repeated abuse has no place. On a Tuesday morning, while the state courthouse office still saw a sparse flow of people coming and going, an unsigned package was neatly placed just outside the evidence processing room. The package bore no sender address, only a shaky handwritten note, urgent related to the Monroe case. The intake staff carefully opened it to find an old yellow envelope sealed tightly with brown tape, alongside a scratched silver USB drive. No one knew who had sent it, but within just 15 minutes of inspection, the room was locked, and representatives from the Department of Justice were summoned urgently. The audio file on the USB contained a recorded conversation from the locker room of a regional police unit. The initial crackling noise barely drowned out a sharply clear voice soon afterward, Ray Colburn's unmistakable tone. "I always know how to shut down those uppity black folks. Whoever thinks they know the law, I'll teach them to keep quiet." Accompanying this were stifled chuckles, and another voice chiming in, "You should teach that at a reform school." The recording revealed a raw, glimpse into the hidden culture, revealing derogatory attitudes masked behind closed doors. This audio file was immediately forwarded to the Multi-Agency Investigative Task Force. Within 6 hours, the Department of Justice publicly confirmed the recording's authenticity. The evidence not only made it impossible for Colburn to deny his words, but also opened the door to investigating years of concealed conversations and attitudes. This time, disciplinary procedures escalated beyond internal reviews or temporary suspensions. It led directly to prosecution. During the disciplinary board hearing, a representative from the police union spoke up. Colburn is a veteran officer. He faces tremendous professional pressure working in a high-crime environment, and sometimes those words are just a way to relieve internal tension. As soon as this defense ended, a committee member responded sharply, "No profession allows the degradation of others' dignity. If it did, that profession deserves to be abolished first." The exchange exposed a fundamental clash between preserving institutional loyalty and enforcing accountability. Throughout the unfolding scandal, Delia Monroe chose silence in public. She avoided media appearances and did not address any press conferences. Instead, her office submitted an 83-page internal report to the Oversight Committee. The report contained no sensational headlines or emotional accusations, only detailed analyses of power structures, recruitment processes, and how the system perpetuated mutual protection among colleagues. The report's simple title, printed in the upper right corner, read, "We need more than convictions. We need a structural change." That same evening, an administrative law expert commented on national television, "That report wasn't written out of anger. It was written with experience and strategic insight. She isn't demanding an end, she's demanding a beginning." The Washington Post later highlighted a crucial excerpt from the report. When a police officer tells colleagues he knows how to shut down uppity black folks and no one in the room objects, the problem isn't individual misconduct, it's institutionalized complicity. The following morning, the Attorney General's office began receiving hundreds of handwritten letters from people who had previously filed complaints that went nowhere. These letters weren't pleas for help, but confirmations. "Now I understand why they stayed silent, and I know why I won't be silent anymore." Those once silenced by the system began reclaiming their voices, not with noise, but with undeniable strength. And this time, they were not alone. Back in the meeting room on the 12th floor, the same 6 officials gathered around the dark wood table where the purple-stamped federal, state, coordination files lay. The blinking red dots on the Broughton County map symbolized more than just random vehicle checks. They were markers of a systemic pattern. The female DOJ agent who first spoke remained resolute. The 3 officers tied to the Monroe incident had prior complaints ignored by flawed protocols. A man in a wrinkled shirt challenged, "Are we investigating because the Attorney General was threatened or because public pressure forced our hand?" The agent's reply was firm, "Because this is no longer an error, it is a repeated failure." A video played on a secondary screen showed Ray Colburn's testimony to the Internal Affairs Unit. Sitting upright with nervous eyes, he claimed, "I didn't know who she was. I was just following reasonable suspicion procedures." The video abruptly cut to Colburn yelling through glass, "I don't need a reason to check a suspect." Silence filled the room. Then, a voice questioned, "What is the protocol? Checking cars without cause? Labeling black drivers suspicious solely because they are driving?" An internal state audit soon revealed 5 additional instances of vehicle checks alleged to involve abuse of authority. All victims were black women, and each complaint had been dismissed before formal investigation, including one case where an elementary school teacher was forced to the ground in a supermarket parking lot on false suspicion of drug trafficking. Her only possession was a student gradebook. An FBI agent highlighted the internal practice of transferring officers after complaints, not as discipline but as a tactic to evade accountability. The female agent struck the table, emphasizing teammates cannot serve as shields for accomplices. The meeting concluded with the Department of Justice demanding special access to data from neighboring counties. An internal directive was issued: investigate not by the victim's rank, but by the system's pattern of repeated offenses. Delia Monroe's silence spoke volumes, as new evidence and recordings continually chipped away at the protective bonds among badge wearers. The next day, legal news portals flashed the warning headline: "If every trigger pull is justified by protocol, it's time to rewrite the protocol." A hearing was scheduled, not for the victims, but for the system itself. This story, unfolding layer by layer, revealed a deeply rooted system resistant to change, but slowly exposed by those brave enough to break its silence. From the dark conversations hidden in locker rooms to the public scrutiny and legal challenges, each element contributed to a reckoning long overdue. The voices once suppressed were now rising, not in anger, but with a determined call for justice and structural reform. The Monroe case was no longer just an incident. It was a catalyst, demanding fundamental change in law enforcement culture and accountability. On a Monday morning, the federal courthouse in the state capitol opened earlier than usual. The air was thick with anticipation, a quiet tension hanging over the building as news of the upcoming trial had spread rapidly. Outside, a long line of media vehicles stretched down the block, their engines idling quietly, but the atmosphere charged with urgency. Reporters and camera crews weren't waiting to broadcast live video. Instead, they were there to listen intently. The courtroom itself was closed to the public, but all audio was being transmitted live on the national radio, turning this trial into a broadcast heard by millions across the country. Inside every press briefing room, small speakers emitted the sound of the proceedings, making it feel as though the entire nation was eavesdropping on a raw interrogation of a system accused of betraying the public's trust and abusing its power. The prosecutor rose from his seat, speaking in a steady, calm voice that carried through the courtroom without needing to be raised. Each word was carefully measured and clear. The defendant, Ray Colburn, stands charged with 3 counts: assault with a deadly weapon, systemic racial discrimination, and threatening a state official while that official was performing their duty. The federal sentencing guidelines recommend a minimum of 12 years imprisonment. As these words were spoken, the sound of pages flipping in legal pads came to an abrupt halt. The atmosphere grew heavy, almost palpable, as if a dense fog had settled over the room. Every pair of eyes turned toward the man at the center of the storm, Colburn himself. Yet, despite the intensity of the moment, he did not look up. His posture was slouched, shoulders heavy with the weight of the charges and the moment's gravity. In the moment's gravity, his hands gripped the cuffs of his pants tightly, knuckles white with tension. The large screen in the courtroom began to play the footage from that fateful night. The moment Colburn pointed his gun through the glass window of the vehicle, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate Delia Monroe's motionless face. Colburn closed his eyes as the video played silently, the absence of commentary or dramatic music making the moment all the more stark and raw. Every breath taken by those present could be heard clearly, the silence around the screen growing oppressive. Colburn offered no words in his defense. No one compelled him to speak. His silence resonated as loudly as a confession. A witness was called next, a former patrol officer who had served in the same county as Colburn. The man, dressed in a plain white shirt, appeared nervous, his voice shaky but steady, refusing to shy away from the truth. "I wasn't there that night," he began, "but I know what the system taught us. We weren't allowed to make mistakes. Our training was about intimidation, about overpowering those we dealt with, to silence them before they could ask why." As he spoke, heads around the courtroom nodded in quiet acknowledgement. No one contradicted or challenged his words. The chilling reality of his statement hung heavily in the air. The defense attorney then presented arguments centered on Colburn's psychological history, the intense pressure he faced in a high-crime environment, and the lack of mental health support available to officers working in such stressful conditions. Yet, despite these attempts to explain his behavior, none of these arguments struck at the heart of the matter. The core truth remained: if the victim that night had not been the Attorney General, this trial likely would never have taken place. It was this stark reality that had eroded public patience and fueled the growing demand for accountability. As the day's proceedings drew to a close, the head of the State Judicial Oversight Committee delivered a statement that sent shockwaves throughout the courtroom and beyond. "We are officially launching a comprehensive statewide investigation focused on 17 police departments suspected of human rights violations or covering up incidents similar to the Colburn case." This announcement aired at the start of the evening news, devoid of sensational headlines, but spreading faster than any rumor. Within hours, local law enforcement agencies found themselves under intense scrutiny. Every report, every record, every complaint that had been ignored or buried over the past 5 years was suddenly brought to light. Some police departments responded by pledging full cooperation with the investigation, opening their doors and records for examination. Others remained silent, unwilling or unable to address the allegations directly. But the message was clear and unmistakable. No place was dark enough anymore to conceal the truth. Rooms once locked tight for internal investigations had to be opened to the public eye. Whispers of threats and intimidation that had echoed only within the shadowed halls of locker rooms and back offices were now broadcast to the nation. With every minute that passed in this trial, one undeniable fact became increasingly clear. No system could be considered safe when it valued its own survival above the equal rights and dignity of the people it was meant to protect. The significance of the trial extended far beyond the defendant's fate. It exposed the deeply entrenched culture within law enforcement agencies, where systemic racism and abuse of power were protected under layers of silence and complicity. The case became a catalyst for a broader conversation about reform, justice, and the urgent need to dismantle structures that had long shielded misconduct from accountability. The broadcast of the trial allowed ordinary citizens to witness firsthand the mechanisms of a system resistant to change, yet vulnerable under scrutiny. Meanwhile, the nation's collective attention remained riveted on the courtroom, where the emotional weight of the evidence and testimonies unfolded with relentless intensity. The silence of Delia Monroe, the victim at the heart of the case, was powerful in itself, a testament to resilience and measured resolve amidst the storm. The trial's proceedings peeled back layers of institutional secrecy, shining light into places once deemed untouchable. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, added to the growing pressure on officials to confront uncomfortable truths and commit to genuine transformation. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of historic importance. Community leaders, activists, and citizens followed the live broadcasts, discussing the implications and sharing their hopes for justice and change. The trial underscored the fragile balance between law enforcement authority and civil rights, highlighting how easily that balance could be tipped by prejudice and unchecked power. It was a moment of reckoning, not only for one officer or one case, but for an entire system whose legitimacy depended on the public's trust. The ongoing investigation promised to uncover more cases like Colburn's, instances where misconduct had been overlooked, complaints dismissed, and victims silenced. The scrutiny forced departments to re-examine their policies, training, and cultures. Questions about accountability, transparency, and reform dominated headlines and conversations alike. As the trial continued, the nation awaited a verdict that would reverberate far beyond the courtroom walls, signaling either the beginning of systemic change or the persistence of entrenched injustice. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, the courtroom remained a space where justice was painstakingly pursued, often slow, sometimes painful, but necessary. The trial illustrated that no individual or institution was above scrutiny, and that safeguarding the rights of all citizens must always take precedence over protecting the reputation or survival of any system. The outcome of this trial, and the investigations it sparked, held the potential to redefine the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve, moving toward a future where equality and accountability were not just ideals but practiced realities. That morning, the court's announcement was broadcast nationwide, not through a flashy press conference, no red carpet or giant LED screens, just an official statement via the federal judiciary system. Ray Colburn, former Broughton County officer, sentenced to 11 years in prison on 3 counts: armed threat, civil rights violation, and racially motivated abuse of power, permanently stripped of his badge and banned from any law enforcement position. In the press waiting room outside the courthouse, reporters did not erupt like after a high-profile criminal case ended, but their eyes held a tight restraint, as if witnessing a deep wound reopened, cleaned, and stitched closed with a thread of justice. Kless was absent at the sentencing. He had been suspended indefinitely a week earlier, with a separate HR statement revealing he was undergoing mandatory psychological evaluation. Though no official ruling had come, a wave of outrage flooded social media demanding criminal prosecution, not for what he did directly, but for what he silently enabled and encouraged. Human rights groups immediately stepped in, arguing suspension was not enough. Distorted psychology is not the cause, but the product of a system encouraging violence against vulnerable groups, a legal expert stated on CNN. While voices from the old system struggled to defend themselves, an open letter from a group of young officers, mostly Black and Latin, spread rapidly, shaking public opinion differently. "We do not stand with Colburn. We choose justice, not silence. We join the force to do right, not to cover up wrong." The letter, signed by 42 officers from 17 states, ended with, "No new cameras needed, just hearts that don't go dark." Meanwhile, Delia Monroe, who had once faced a gun mere inches from her face, briefly appeared at the state's justice reform announcement, speaking plainly. She stood at a wooden podium, looking into the press rows, saying clearly, "I don't need an apology, I need understanding. Power is not held by the one with the gun. True power belongs to those who keep their dignity, even when threatened." Her words were front-page headlines the next morning, accompanied by a black and white photo of her standing with hands resting lightly on the table, expressionless, but eyes forcing the entire system to reconsider. It was not just Colburn on trial. Those who covered up, ignored complaints, or judged victims by skin color, all were brought to light. Many resigned, others entered internal investigations. A federal task force named Monroe Standard was officially formed to oversee similar cases nationwide. For the first time in years, change came not from gunfire or bloodshed, but from a straightforward question in the night. Can justice be inside, with every door marked, not as a place where closed verdicts are written behind locked rooms, but where every step of justice leaves a trace on blank paper? Outside, Delia Monroe returned to her office, the same car waiting, no escort, no PR team. On her desk lay a new stack of files, and beside it a small brass plaque engraved with the words, "A verdict does not end anything. It only begins the right way." That morning, in the main chamber of the state capitol, the air was heavy like morning fog trapped behind thick glass, stretched tight like an overstrained violin string. The third special session reviewing the Monroe Act was underway, but no one dared to relax. Outside, the sky was clear with soft sunlight. Inside the legislative building, a suffocating tension hung. On the wall behind the speaker's chair, a large electronic board displayed in bright white letters, "Monroe Act, Approval Session, Third Meeting." The flickering text under cold ceiling lights served as a constant reminder that time was running out. Everyone present knew this morning would mark a milestone. Whether progress or failure, no one was sure. Below the sign sat over 50 faces, each carrying a story, a vote, and a responsibility. Some were white legislators from conservative urban districts where the motto, "Order and Security," hung on every city hall wall. Others came from southern coastal areas where hundreds of unjustified traffic stops were recorded annually, most without cameras to witness them. In front of each delegate lay a 12-page printed copy of the bill, last coded as Proposal 486B, the Citizen Protection Act regarding coercive encounters with authorities. This was no symbolic law. It promised to overhaul the entire nighttime law enforcement process. It was the legal safety net many had long demanded, now within reach, but facing a tense final hurdle, was absent. She did not stand at the podium, nor appear in the public gallery, nor join lobbyists or media, yet her name was everywhere, on every printout, in every live report, in the eyes of those holding decision-making power, a striking absence. The session began with the State Judiciary Committee chair's presentation. He stood, speaking clearly without amplification. Once passed, the Monroe Act will require all traffic stops between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. to be fully recorded with personal cameras and vehicle devices. Every request from law enforcement must include a specific reason, fully recorded and stored in the judicial system for 6 months. No reason, no stop, no evidence, no authority. A tense silence followed. Then, in a deeper tone, his words struck like a hammer, breaking years of prejudice. Because if even an attorney general can be held at gunpoint in the middle of the night, none of us is safe. The room froze for seconds. No objections, no smiles, only a spreading cold awareness. A light tap echoed from the back row, hands drumming on wood. It was Representative Grant, who had voted against the bill early on. A conservative who typically avoided police oversight reforms, but today he stood and said, "My wife was stopped in 2003, just for driving home late from work. No one filmed that moment. No one believed her. When I saw Ms. Monroe's video, I saw my wife there, helpless, alone." The room did not erupt in applause, but some quietly wept. Emotion was present without words. By noon, the official vote took place. On the electronic board, numbers appeared slowly, one line at a time. 41 yes, 9 no, 2 abstain. The Monroe Act was approved. No roaring claps, no jumping from seats, but some bowed their heads quietly, witnessing history turn a page. Some clenched fists, others stared blankly, blinking faster than usual. CNN's evening news led with a bold headline, "First state passes law mandating cameras for all-night encounters, thanks to a woman who didn't shout." And in New York, a young lawyer named Amina tweeted simply but emotionally, "Just past a police checkpoint, camera on, I felt safe, because someone stood firm so I wouldn't have to bow my head." 3 other states, Oregon, Vermont, and New Mexico, announced studies to draft their versions. A temporary federal council was proposed to oversee the process, ensuring the law's integrity against local politics and budget pressures. Meanwhile, critics of Delia Monroe fell silent. Articles branding her a divisive power seeker vanished from far-right media homepages. On a popular political podcast, a host who once openly attacked her admitted in a new episode, "Maybe I was wrong. She wasn't after power. She just made us stop pretending to be blind." And Delia, she gave one exclusive interview to a small local radio. No cameras, no stage, just a soundproof room with a desk mic and 2 swivel chairs. Asked about her feelings on the law named after her, she replied briefly, "My name there doesn't matter. What matters is others won't have to bow, shake with fear, or beg just for walking on the road at midnight." Afterward, she declined all invitations, no awards, no gala appearances, no Supreme Court judge nominations, one of the most coveted posts. On the prosecutor's office internal blog, she left one short line, in lowercase, "Law exists because people take the time to fix it." The Monroe Act, 3 simple words, became more than a legal text. It became a reminder that before a cop pulls a gun, they must ask, "Is the camera on? Do I have a valid reason? If not, I'm breaking the law." And for citizens who once bowed their heads, stayed silent and feared, it stands as proof that a winter night might start at a gun barrel but can end with a signature on a document that changes the future. Justice isn't made by shouting, it's made by steady resolve, refusing to back down despite violence ahead and silence behind. On an autumn morning, the State Law School campus was bathed in soft golden sunlight, gentle yet bright enough to cast clear shadows of leaves on the stone benches. The crisp air carried the scent of wind mixed with old paper from the nearby library. Scattered stone tables, usually filled with chatting students before class, were unusually quiet today. No laughter, no hurried footsteps on the stairs. Everyone seemed to quietly head in one direction, the second floor of the main lecture hall. The large classroom upstairs, often used for special seminars, had been full since early, but unlike usual, no one was scrolling phones, whispering, or typing hurried notes. They weren't there to earn attendance points or meet a celebrity. They came for something waiting, something no textbook taught or reading could replace. At the podium stood Delia Monroe. No introduction, no lighting effects, no background music or slides behind her. No assistance or tech support. She simply stood there, wearing a plain white shirt buttoned to the collar, hair neatly tied back. One hand held a pen, the other rested lightly on the table, not leaning on the podium. She didn't use a microphone, yet her deep, clear voice filled the room, cutting through every row of seats, reaching the confused thoughts of young minds. On the board behind her, written in white chalk, was a single line: "Law does not start from the court. It starts from the choice not to remain silent." Her lecture did not begin with a constitutional quote or abstract definitions like legal capacity or criminal elements. There was no academia here, no three-step system, no scholarly citations, only presence and real questions. A male student in the middle row raised his hand. His voice wasn't loud, but clear enough for the whole room to hear, and showed he wasn't alone in wondering, why didn't you back down? Why not file a civil suit for damages? Why not avoid the media and public opinion? All eyes turned to her. Some glanced at the student, as if to say, "Don't ask personal questions," but Delia did not react like someone confronted about private matters. She paused, looked around, settled her gaze on him, then answered calmly without evasion or condescension. "Because I don't represent myself. I represent the survival of many others. If someone with my position can have a gun pointed at their head, how will those without any title be treated if no one speaks up?" The room's atmosphere dropped. Someone swallowed hard. Some clenched hands under desks. The rest sat quietly, as if hearing an invisible indictment, not aimed at individuals, but at the very system they were trying to understand and enter. Delia continued, her voice steady, each word weighted as if tested by reality. "I planned to stay silent that night. Truly, when the gun was pressed against the glass, I knew any movement could make me the morning headline. Then I thought, if I stay silent again, who will speak for me? One more silence could be the last chance to survive, not because I'm special, but because I've seen others lose that chance." No one moved. Perhaps because they understood her words were not illustrations, but reality. What happened to a woman who once held every privilege the system could grant and still almost didn't survive? She didn't raise her voice for effect or recount details to evoke emotion. Every sentence, every example was like a mirror reflecting the helplessness many had never named. At the back, a female student covered her face with her hand. She didn't sob out loud, but her shoulders trembled, not from sorrow or pity, but because, for the first time, she saw a woman step onto a stage not to teach, but to remind that silence is an action, and sometimes the most dangerous one. Delia did not retell court detail, emphasize the Monroe Act, or use her fame as defense. All she left in that lecture was a reminder. The legal system isn't designed to protect the vulnerable's feelings. It only changes when the powerful dare to voice their fears. Turning back to the board, she added a second line beneath the first. "Justice's survival depends on who dares to take responsibility." The room felt frozen. No heavy breaths, no typing. Even the ceiling fan's hum became louder in the absolute silence. When the final bell rang, no one stood, packed up, or spoke. Everyone remained seated, eyes following her as she quietly put her pen in her shirt pocket and gathered her small notebook unseen by others. No calls to action, no slogans, no moral lessons imposed. Yet as she stepped down, everyone stood simultaneously, not by command or ritual. Then applause broke out, not for fame or glory, but for the truth spoken calmly by someone who once had the right to remain silent and chose not to. That was the first lesson in criminal law. No clause requires courage, but every legal advance begins with the bravery of one person. The The small hall of the State Police Academy had no mourning flags, no black ribbons, no special notices on the doors, nor urgent memos on the hallway bulletin board like in major meetings. No solemn music, no loudspeakers, no opening speeches, yet from the moment anyone stepped inside, there was a sense that something was about to happen, something beyond the usual curriculum or daily schedule. The air felt heavy, not cold, but uncomfortable, like a weight pressing on the chest, as if thick curtains had been drawn to block the light, though the lights remained on. Pale yellow ceiling lights evenly lit rows of plastic chairs arranged neatly. The white walls, stained with age, showed patches of old paint not yet patched. The air conditioner droned steadily. Everything looked ordinary, almost out of place, amid the silence filling the room. That day's meeting was not on the official training agenda. No prior emails, no bolded titles. Yet over 60 trainees arrived on time, some hearing by word of mouth, others driven by curiosity. Nobody truly knew the reason, but all were present. On the podium stood a young man, tall, with broad shoulders and neatly trimmed brown hair, wearing a crisp dark blue uniform with a shining badge pinned to his left chest. His face was calm, not indifferent, but composed, as one who had thought deeply and thoroughly. He did not remove his gloves or hat, out of respect. He was not there for ceremony, but for something else. No laptop, no papers, no media support, no cue cards, only his unwavering gaze and a clear, steady voice that echoed against the ceiling with unmistakable clarity. I was once a trainee under Lieutenant Colburn, and I was taught not to protect justice, but to control people. His first sentence caused some to blink, others to lean forward, yet no one spoke. Perhaps shock, perhaps disbelief, but no, he spoke plainly, without hesitation or caution. He continued evenly, each word like a nail driven into the ceiling. I was praised for not hesitating to give orders. I was patted on the shoulder for tightening grip and holding longer. I was trained to make others afraid. He did not shout, no need. His voice didn't have to be loud. The truth was heavy enough. Each sentence exposed a system everyone knew, but none dared to name. He raised his hand slowly, without drama or show. His hand reached inside his chest, removed the badge symbolizing power, honor, and expectations, then gently placed it on the wooden podium. The metallic sound echoed softly but clearly to the back rows. A knock, not on a door but on hearts. It's not that I hate this profession. I once believed it was a path to protect the community. He paused. But I cannot continue when what I protect is no longer justice, but a facade for arrogance, discrimination, and lies. A trainee near the front leaned forward, eyes fixed on the badge, once a small object, now a symbol of an overwhelming truth. At the back, an older female instructor who had taught 3 previous classes bowed her head. Her gray hair stood out among the crowd, eyes closed, hands clasped before her chest. No tears visible, but no need. She was mourning silently. No applause, no standing ovation, no objections, no interruptions, no whispers, no defensive reactions, just silence, deep silence that usually follows great storms. Behind the stage, a young technician who was originally there to check the microphone turned on his phone and recorded the moment. No request, no script, no angle adjustment. That simple footage captured nearly the entire moment that shifted the organization's atmosphere. Only 30 minutes later, the clip was posted on the Academy's internal network with a brief caption, "Resignation without fanfare, but worth more than 1,000 meetings." 4 hours later, on the 4th floor of the State Justice Building, Delia Monroe received the link. She was in a planning meeting for the week ahead, but stopped everything when she opened the clip. She watched it all, without skipping or fast-forwarding, eyes fixed. When the video ended, Delia showed no obvious emotion, no sigh, no faint smile, just leaned over, took a blank sheet, and wrote by hand, "Resigning is brave, but rebuilding is braver. The letter was sent directly to the academy, addressed by name, without invitation, introduction, or request, just a message deep enough to make an impact. Days later, at Delia's office, a handwritten letter arrived from Joshua Perrin, the young officer in the clip. It contained no long story, no excuses, no self-praise, only one assertion. I have no defense. I only wish to stand on the right side for the first time, by action, not words. Soon after, his application to join the internal reform team led by Delia Monroe was approved. On the day he officially became a member, a photo was taken. The ground floor meeting room. Everyone seated in a circle. No name tags, no uniforms. At the center lay the first draft of the new code of conduct, handwritten with yellow highlights marking every small detail, from how to approach citizens to vehicle inspection timing. Joshua Perrin never spoke publicly about that day. No TV interviews, no medals. But his name was later mentioned in the appendix of the Monroe Act, Second Amendment, with the simple note, the first to choose to remove his badge to keep respect. That day, the small hall of the State Police Academy had no mourning flags, no banners, no special notices on the doors or hall bulletin boards. Yet inside, a clear weight pressed down on every person present, as if something invisible bore down on their shoulders. The ceiling lights shone as usual, casting soft yellow light on rows of worn plastic chairs and walls yellowed by time. The air conditioner hummed quietly and steadily. The room resembled any weekly internal briefing session cadets attended. But today was different. At the podium stood a young man, tall with broad shoulders, neatly cut brown hair, fair skin, and a calm expression bordering on cold. He wore his uniform, a dark navy blue police suit, the badge shining metallic under the lights. But no one mistook this for an ordinary speech. He carried no script, didn't read notes, didn't set a laptop on the podium like usual presentations. Just steady, unwavering eyes and a clear voice echoing softly off tile ceilings, filling the silent room of over 60 cadets. I was once Cadet Sergeant Colburn's trainee, and I was taught not to protect justice, but to control people. His opening words hit the concrete floor like a hammer, short, direct, no beating around the bush. Some cadets shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances, but no interruptions, no coughs or deliberate noises to break the spreading silence. He continued, each sentence like forged steel. I was praised for not hesitating to give orders. I was patted on the shoulder for tighter, longer holds. I was trained to instill fear. No applause, no nods, but everyone knew he spoke the truth, a truth never before voiced openly within these walls, a system quietly teaching control before empathy. He raised his hand, not fast, not slow, with a simple motion carrying a small shock. He touched his chest, removed the badge, a symbol of power, responsibility, and trust, and placed it on the wooden podium. The metal clink sounded clear, like a knock on consciousness. Not because I hate this job. I once believed it was a path to protect the community. He paused a moment. But I cannot continue when what I protect is no longer justice, but a cover for arrogance, discrimination, and lies. The hall fell completely silent. A cadet in the front row, perhaps just a few steps away, leaned forward, eyes fixed on the lone badge. Small, yet now a symbol of something far greater. An elderly female instructor with silver hair tied back quietly lowered her head. No tears, no strong expression, but her closed eyes said enough. She had heard and understood. No applause, no dissent, no whispers or angry reactions. Only silence, sometimes heavier than the longest applause. Behind the stage, a technician, originally there to check sound, quietly recorded the entire moment on his phone. No plan, no arrangement, just a sense that something was worth preserving, and he was right. The under 5-minute clip was posted online within 30 minutes, with a brief description. Resignation without fanfare, but worth more than 1,000 meetings. Hours later, at her office on the 4th floor of the State Justice Building, Delia Monroe received the link. She opened the video without hurry, leaned back, and watched fully. No strong emotion, no surprise, no tears, just deep focus from someone who understood exactly what had happened. When the clip ended, she said nothing. She quietly took a blank sheet of paper, wrote by hand in black ink. Resigning is courage, but rebuilding is even braver. The short letter was placed in an envelope addressed clearly and sent directly to the State Police Academy. No explanations, no contact info, just those words, enough to make the recipient pause. Days later, at Delia's office, a handwritten letter arrived from the young officer in the clip, Joshua Perrin. No lengthy apologies, no tales of pressure or past, just a short passage. I have no excuses. I only have a wish to stand on the right side for the first time by action, not words. Soon after, his application to join the internal reform team led by Delia was approved. On the day he officially became a member, a photo was taken, a ground floor meeting room, everyone seated in a circle. No uniforms, no name tags, no titles displayed. At the center lay the first draft of the new code of conduct, with original handwriting and yellow notes. Joshua Perrin never spoke publicly again. No TV appearances, no interviews, no medals. He withdrew from all attention. But his name, Joshua Perrin, was later cited in the final appendix of the Second Amended Monroe Act, accompanied by a simple note, the first to remove his badge to keep his dignity. The frosted glass door on the ground floor of the new State Department of Justice building bore a single line etched into the transparent surface: Delia Monroe, Office of Executive Justice Reform. No slogan, no traditional justice symbols like scales or swords, no elaborate graphics to persuade or project power, just a name, 5 letters carved in a straight, uniform, serious font. Yet its simplicity made people pause. In the past 3 months, hundreds had passed through that door, not out of curiosity or job-seeking, but carrying a weight heavier than any legal file. A deep grievance. Grievances unheard, unrecorded, unreported, and impossible to express to any other authority. Inside the room beyond that door, they, for the first time, sat down. Facing them was not a cold bureaucrat or a lawyer parsing words, but a woman who had nearly lost her life because of a system's silence. Delia Monroe needed no long introduction. Everyone who came knew her story. She didn't retell or lament it. Instead, she invited people to join a program named as simply as the office itself, Listening to the People. Each session began with a short question Delia wrote by hand on a whiteboard. Always the same. Have you ever been stopped by police when doing nothing wrong, and no one believed you? No stage lights, no microphones, no scripted dialogues. Just a circle of chairs, a whiteboard, a few bottles of water, and the full presence of listening. Each person brought a story, none alike. A middle-aged woman recounted being asked to open her trunk simply for wearing sunglasses while driving at night. The reason sounded like a joke, but for her it was a night full of fear on a deserted highway. A calm, brown-skinned student detailed the night he was forced to kneel on a freeway for wrong lane usage, despite no signage. The scars on his knees were not from rocks or dirt, but from suspicion itself. An elderly father tearfully told how his daughter was held on the roadside for over 30 minutes in cold rain because her license plate was mud-covered, and he wasn't allowed to approach or shield her. Delia neither interrupted nor nodded in confirmation or denial. She just took notes carefully. Her notebook wasn't for evidence, but a map, a real map tracing the painful detours the system forced people to take. After each sharing session, Delia invited a special guest, a former police officer who had served within the system she sought to change. They sat face to face with citizens, no badges, no titles, no defense, no official masks, only humans confronting responsibility and truth. Each week a different officer, each week a public listening, not to convict, but to face reality. One weekend afternoon, a man entered, wearing a gray sweater, slightly hunched, cautious eyes holding a thick notebook full of notes, evidence against claims. Like a shield, he was once a sergeant at the West Precinct, which had 3 lawsuits for unlawful stops. He said nothing as he sat, simply opening his notebook, ready. But after 20 minutes, when an elderly woman shared how she was interrogated just for a small black educator decal on her rear window, he fell silent, then closed the notebook, sighed softly. The room expected a rebuttal. Instead, he said simply, "I learned to doubt, but never learned to apologize. Today, I think it's time From that moment, the program shifted. Victims began to be invited into new roles: policy advisors, no law degrees, no academic titles, but they had lived experiences books never cover. A young woman forced to open her trunk in snow after late work was chosen to lead community surveys. A truck driver who first posted the video of Delia's gunpoint stop was asked to draft night traffic stop procedures. The old system did not collapse, but its links were replaced by real experience, by real voices. During one session, a moment silenced the room. A small boy of about 10, sitting next to his mother, raised his hand. Surprising no one, stopped him. His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. "I don't understand all adult stuff, but if I grow up like Ms. Monroe, being a cop won't be scary anymore." Silence followed for seconds, then spontaneous applause. Not led, not formal, just natural when someone speaks truth. Delia bowed her head in thanks, saying nothing more. The next morning, when people arrived at work, a small plaque had been mounted beside her name on the wall. "No one needs to be Delia Monroe. Just be the one who makes justice no longer a privilege." The honor ceremony was held in a modest conference room inside the State Administrative Building, an unassuming space much like any routine internal meeting room. There were no massive LED screens glowing brightly, no sparkling stage lights from specialized equipment, and certainly no red carpet stretching from the entrance as seen at national events. The atmosphere was not theatrical nor staged as a grand celebration. Everything was so simple it seemed like an extended briefing session. Rows of chairs were neatly aligned, spaced just enough to avoid being too intimate or too cold. On each seat lay a beige paper nameplate, plain and monochrome, resting on small plastic holders. No gold plating, no metal trim. At the center of the stage stood a plain wooden podium, its corners slightly worn from frequent use. A small black microphone, devoid of logos or brand names, was attached to the podium. Behind it, the wall was smooth and bare except for a short phrase painted in stark white against a dark gray background. "Never assume power by color." It was neither a flashy slogan nor a typical political catchphrase, but a cold, unvarnished truth on display. Delia Monroe entered the hall exactly on time. She did not arrive early to prepare mentally, nor did she show up late to attract attention like many dignitaries often do. Instead, she chose the precise moment the door opened to blend in as an ordinary guest. She wore a crisp black suit with no embroidered badges, no honor ribbons, or any symbol signaling her rank. Everything about her was stripped down to near invisibility, if one did not already know who she was. When the host calmly announced her name in a steady, unexcited voice, without cheers or fanfare, she quietly stepped onto the podium. No one rose to applaud or lead her in. There was no prolonged applause, as usual. The audience simply watched her, not with eager anticipation, but with the weary expectancy of those who had read too many headlines and were used to main figures delivering some grand speech. They expected a triumphant address about legal victory after years of litigation, a tale of comeback from a confrontation that might have ended tragically, and about the role and power she now held. But Delia chose not to take that path. She neither gestured nor roused the crowd. Instead, she opened a folded sheet of paper, no slides, no visuals, and began to read slowly. Justice does not come from applause. It comes from not backing down when someone shouts, "Get out of the car now." The entire hall seemed to lose its breath. No one moved or spoke. But this was no ordinary silence. It was a heavy silence, forcing people to confront what they usually avoided. That simple phrase struck directly at memories many kept hidden, memories of abused power, nameless fears when stopped on a dark street, scrutinizing eyes, and commands that seemed harmless but were filled with threat. At the back of the room, a calm young law student representing Southern law schools quietly started recording with his personal phone. No one noticed. He just wanted to preserve a fragment of this strange moment. Yet he did not realize that this mere 7-second clip would later spread far more powerfully than any verdict ever announced, stronger than hours of press conferences. On social media, the recording had no background music, no special effects, no image of Delia, only her voice, raw and genuine. That rawness made it spread further. Thousands, high school teachers, veterans, white lawyers, single black mothers, all felt it belonged to them. Get out of the car, now. Words that once froze a high-ranking woman in the night had become a symbol of silent but unyielding resistance. The response to that command was neither weapons, nor lawsuits, nor accusations, but simply existence. A declaration impossible to deny. The organizers then offered to present her with a gold plaque engraved Justice of the Year, a prestigious honor, a long-expected recognition. But Delia simply shook her head and declined. I am not here to be honored. I am here because I survived. Her answer was not a gesture of nobility. It was plain truth. No one around her disputed or interrupted. They silently watched her leave the podium, crossing the rows of seats, many eyes still wide with surprise, not fully grasping what had just occurred. The ceremony ended with no music, no confetti, no celebratory toast. No one asked for photos or approached her to shake hands. Yet that night, in the local TV news's usual closing segment, the farewell line was replaced by a running caption across the screen. She did not need to be loud, she needed to be real. Delia Monroe left the hall in silence, as if all she had endured, being blocked, questioned, stripped of personal rights, no longer bound her. No bowed head, no backward glance. She did not seek the spotlight, but every quiet step she took was quietly reshaping the path for those who would come after. There are moments, just a few brief seconds, that reveal the worst in a system: arrogance, prejudice, and abuse of power. But it's also in those moments that a person's courage, intelligence, and strength can tip the balance. Delia Monroe's story isn't an isolated case. It's a reminder that we live in a society where a black woman, even holding the highest authority in the state's justice system, can still have a gun pointed at her just because of her skin color. And if it can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. What makes Delia different isn't her title, but her calmness and decisiveness in the face of violence. She didn't yell or fight back. Every word and look made the entire system step back. The truth is, a person's talent and worth should never be judged by appearance or shallow assumptions. She didn't need to prove her strength with weapons, but with integrity and faith in justice. And that's what makes society take a hard look at itself. This story isn't just a legal case. It's a lesson about how we see others, how we treat each other, and how a civilized society must protect fairness. It makes us ask ourselves, have you ever been wrongly judged just because someone didn't understand you? Have you ever been underestimated, but quietly proven yourself better than they thought? If this story makes you think, share it so more people can reflect and learn. Justice isn't just a slogan. It's action, courage, and clear judgment against abused power. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We're committed to delivering the best content. Don't forget to subscribe and keep following for more inspiring stories.